Boston's waterfront has come a long way from the times of dirty water and economic decline. Tax dollars for the harbor cleanup led to high expectations of inclusion, but a recent poll shows more needs to be done for visitors, business opportunities, and even for protection from climate change. Survey was done as part of a pre-election effort by 40 groups working together as the Coalition for a Resilient and Inclusive Waterfront. To tell us about the effort, including a forum on July 29th, is our guest from one of the organizations, the president and CEO of Boston Harbor Now, Kathy Abbott. Thank you very much for being with us, Kathy.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. Very happy to be here.
Kathy, when I think of a group that's sort of concerned about the waterfront or the harbor, I used to have trouble getting up to a handful of them, but you get 40 groups here. I think that really suggests we have a whole different idea of focus on the waterfront and its impact. Tell us a little bit about the groups and that kind of a footprint.
Well, I think it's really important that it's 40 and growing, which we're really excited about. And it's important to remember that this is a coalition focused on the waterfront writ large, which means not just Boston Harbor, but also the rivers, because it's really important. We think one of the things that people don't realize is that the city of Boston is about 89 square miles, and about 42 square miles of that is water. So those three major rivers, the Neponset, the Charles, and the Mystic, as well as Boston Harbor, really reach into our entire city and back into the greater Boston region and connect all the neighborhoods and many communities to the waterfront. So this is a public resource, both the public parks along it, as well as the water itself, that we really want everybody in the city of Boston and the surrounding region to have a say in what happens there and to use it and to see it as their own.
I'm glad you reminded me of the rivers, because one quality I think a lot of people like about the waterfront, at least in some parts of it, is that it brings different kinds of people together. And you could even go along the Neponset River, Mattapan and Milton, you're seeing people from both sides mingling together. Well, what's the importance of that?
Well, I think it's hugely important in terms of the fabric of the city, right? I think we've always looked at the waterfront as sort of a neighborhood-free zone. So whether it's the waterfront itself, the waterfront downtown, or the waterfront along the rivers, or the Harbor Islands, it's a place that it connects us. It connects neighborhood to neighborhood, community to community. And you're right, you're absolutely right. It's a place where people, and particularly during this past year with COVID, where we saw individuals and families getting out and really connecting and mingling and building a sense of community along and around those waterfronts.
Well, one thing I picked up from your poll is that people in Boston can't seem to get enough of this.
It's really true. I mean, if you want to get a sense of space, if you want to get a sense of community, if you want to get out, and there's all kinds of data about how important it is to get outside and spend time in nature, right? Some of the earliest studies were about mental health and getting children with learning disabilities, 15 or 20 minutes outdoors help them to concentrate that much longer and harder. Patients in hospitals recovering that much more quickly if they had access to or views of the green outdoors. And that data there's more and more data along those lines. It's a very, very real benefit. And we've really seen it. And so it's partly that. And I think it's also the community piece that I mentioned, and there's an economic element to it in terms of the ways in which these areas enhance the communities that they are adjacent to or part of. That's a really important piece, both for all of us who live here and for those folks who visit.
When you talk about the economic, I want to sort of exempt the Seaport District for a little bit, but if you talk about a place like Piers Park in East Boston, is there an economic ripple effect from that?
There is an economic ripple effect on that, whether it's, the cart, the person with the cart at the front gate selling, slices of mango, or it's the ice cream shop not too far away that's got additional foot traffic because of the people who are heading down there, or Piers Park Sailing Center, which is doing a booming business, serving people in the community, teaching them how to sail and getting them out on Boston Harbor. Yes, there's absolutely a very local benefit. There are jobs associated with that. And then there's the role that all of these, that the harbor and the rivers and the waterfront plays in our tourism economy. which I think is still the #3 contributor to the state's GDP in the Commonwealth, and a major contributor here in the city of Boston. So yes, extremely important. There's also, in the case of the harbor, the role that the port plays, and that has a very real, very direct economic impact. Massport did a study letting us know that in 2012, I think it was contributing 4.6 billion to our economy, and in 2019, it was, I think, 8.2 billion, and 50,000 jobs, direct and indirect, initially in 2012, and in 2019, I think they saw that it was up to 63,000 jobs. So yes, there's some very real direct economic benefits. There's also, obviously, you mentioned the seaport, there's the real estate value that is inherent now that the harbor is clean, which is really, and that's some of the impetus for the coalition and for this work at this point in time. We don't want the harbor to be walled off, only accessible and welcoming to those who can afford it. It is a public resource, and we want it to feel welcoming and be accessible to everybody in the city and the region.
Well, whether you're talking about the Neponset River Greenway or even the Charles River Esplanade, people see that, well, it's picturesque, that's free. You can walk, that's free. You can bike, that's free. But when people look at the seaport, they start to think about how much it costs. What does your poll say about that?
That people do feel that, particularly people of color, feel less welcome, feel that it's less accessible, that there is an inherent, that it's cost prohibitive. So there's work to be done to make sure that it's not only welcoming from a visual and aesthetic point of view, to your point, but in terms of the kind of retail that we put into those places, the kinds of restaurants, the kinds of shops, that they really are accessible to everybody at every price point. And that there are lots and lots of free things to see and do along the waterfront on the islands is really important.
Now, I did see one article about a Black-owned barbecue restaurant in the Seaport District, but that seems to be the exception, because most of the business opportunities, the ability to tap into the wealth there, it seems to be going elsewhere.
There needs to be a real effort made, and I think there are efforts being made to try to begin to make that neighborhood more inclusive. I mean, it really needs to still become more of a neighborhood, right? It got Trader Joe's as a supermarket, but there isn't a library, there isn't a school. It's the beginnings of a neighborhood, and there's, I think, a lot to be done still to have it evolve to be a neighborhood that we really want to showcase as the future of Boston. Well, and that means being much more diverse and much more inclusive, and not just it's from an economic perspective, it's from a race perspective, it's really across all fronts.
Well, one other reason the coalition now is so broad, and this is one thing we didn't really see very much in the 1980s, was about climate change. And we're talking about places like the East Boston Greenway being flooded, Seaport Boulevard, of course, too. What did people say about that as an issue?
People are very concerned about that. I think the #1 issue that came across loud and clear was people understanding and appreciating the value of open space. So that's fantastic, blue and green. The second most important issue is this issue of climate resiliency. People are really getting the message that as a city, we are vulnerable to rising sea level and storms. And we saw that a couple of winters ago with the flooding that occurred across Long Wharf and up onto State Street and down in the Seaport and in the Fort Point Channel neighborhood. It's become very real for people. They recognize it as the threat that it is. So this is a really interesting time where all of us are both trying to attract a lot more people to the harbor at the same time that we're needing to learn how to protect everybody from the harbor and these changes that are happening as a result of climate.
Father, is there anything else in this poll that people said that they wanted to see that you're going to be asking candidates about down the line?
I think there was an awful lot that people wanted to see. I think the parks, the climate, the city government really trying to leverage more community benefits out of the developments that are occurring along the harbor so that the broader public is benefiting as well as the individual developments. I think increased diversity that we already talked about was really important. I think the idea that the harbor needs to become a priority, that whoever the next mayor is there's a limited amount of waterfront and it belongs to everybody. So it's really, it is incumbent upon the next mayor to have a big vision of connecting that limited resource to all of us who live here and find ways to help all of us benefit from it.
Now, I know when somebody proposes a big project near the waterfront or anywhere else in the city, there's a lot of focus on size and density and parking and linkage benefits. But one of the things in this poll people said is that, if you do this on the waterfront, maybe it might be better to have more accessibility and even more square footage that the public can come to. What about that?
Yeah, we Chapter 91, which is the regulations that govern a lot of that at the state level anyway, and impacts the city. Those regulations and the municipal harbor plans that we've heard a lot about were really created 30, 40 years ago. Obviously, the economics of waterfront development on the harbor have changed significantly since then, as well as this new issue of climate change and sea level rise. So it really is, people feel strongly that we need to be being more, we need to have the benefits that the public is accruing, keeping pace with the economic value that's inherent in that real estate. And we need to, the Harbor Walk, for instance, which is a wonderful, wonderful resource that really was created by one of our predecessor organizations, Vivian Lee and the Boston Harbor Association, is a phenomenal, working with the state and the city and the private developers, created a wonderful 43 miles of the 47 miles of shoreline, making it a walkway. In today's time, a 10 or 12 foot walkway really isn't enough with the advent of sea level rise. So we talk about Harbor Walk 2.0. We talk about needing to broaden the Harbor Walk, to widen it, to bring it up, to put attractions along that Harbor Walk that will bring more people down. So there are changes that need to be made to bring things, we think, into the 21st century to create, we really want to develop a world-class waterfront here that we can all be proud of and that we can all benefit from.
Finally, Kathy, I know you have a forum with candidates scheduled on July 29th at the aquarium. If people want some more details, either about that event or everything else that's going to be happening in the campaign around information on waterfront issues, where can they find that?
They can find that by just Googling Coalition for Resilient and Inclusive Waterfront, and they'll go to the website, to the landing page, and the information on the forum will be there. They could also go to the Boston Harbor Now website, or any of the coalition members will have that information available.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Kathy Abbott from Boston Harbor Now. We'll have more news in just a moment.